Hi, I just want to spend a couple of minutes talking to you about how to study economics, because it is a subject that a lot of students struggle with. And there are some good reasons for that. I mean, firstly, it introduces a lot of concepts that are previously unfamiliar to students, so they won't have studied it before at school or at university. Secondly, it's very theoretical. So there's big amount of theory that might seem overwhelming to a lot of people, but also not always intuitive. And unfortunately, as always when you're working with theory, sometimes you just have to accept it. You may or may not agree with it, but there's a syllabus that you just have to follow, and there are right and wrong answers. So unlike something like history, where there's a degree of subjectivity and you can dispute it and argue it, with a theoretical subject like economics, you just have to learn the set theory. And then finally, the other main reason why I think a lot of students struggle with economics is the maths, the mathematical aspect of it, which some people struggle with. So things like supply and demand, where it requires you to read off a supply and demand diagram, or things like inflation or calculating index numbers. These are all things that require you not just to be comfortable with the concepts, but also with dealing with them mathematically. And I think what's particularly tough about economics is the fact that you're doing all of these things all at once. So you're translating theory into mathematical proofs. And to do that, you have to be sufficiently fluent with the maths so that it becomes second nature. You can illustrate a concept using numbers without too much thought. And so I think juggling these things can be particularly tough for students. Now fortunately, the theory isn't actually that difficult, and neither really is the maths. So if you're doing economics A-level, for instance, you won't really need more than a B at GCSE maths to do well in the mathematical questions in economics. And so with that in mind, here are my two pieces of advice for how to study economics. Firstly, really get comfortable with the maths, really get fluent in the mathematical questions and dealing with those questions at whatever level of economics you're studying. So that's probably going to be a case of doing lots and lots of practice. And I mean, mathematical questions in economics tend to follow a similar format. So it will usually be, if it's inflation, then it will usually follow a set format. So you can just practice it over and over. And as I said, the level that it requires isn't usually that high. And my second piece of advice is, in dealing with this, this vast amount of theory that may or may not be that familiar and may not seem that intuitive to you, the best thing to do is to turn it into your intuition, and to do that is to read current affairs, read things like The Economist, for instance, or the Financial Times, if you really want to push yourself. Where these, and also BBC News or The Guardian or Telegraph, or whichever newspaper you prefer. These economic concepts come in all the time. I mean, especially now after the financial crisis, everything is economics comes into everything somehow. So the more you read things like The Economist, for instance, the more you'll really start to develop an intuition for these concepts, so that they actually start to become common sense, and you don't feel like you're rote learning something for the purposes of the exam, but that actually you can walk into an economics exam for the most part not having to do all that much revision, because you know the theory like off the back of your hand. Note both of these pieces of advice, so getting fluent with the maths and also turning the theory into intuition, both of them require long-term commitments. So it is a case of at least 6 months before your exam, really investing in developing habits for reading the news and getting familiar with those concepts in an applied way, which can also make you enjoy the subject more, because you can see how it's relevant to real life, to the world. And also with the maths, practicing early on and taking them seriously and seeing where your weaknesses are, and then targeting those weaknesses, because as I said, it's easy marks in the bag if you can nail them. They tend to follow similar formats to mathematical questions. Anyway, best of luck.